we need to be very mindful about who are we designing for, who's not in the room as we design these things. And that really comes from leaders who are thinking about this in a way that allows us to enhance rather than replace.
And so if you don't take the time to understand, where the client is and where their problems really are, you don't know what you're solutioning for. And then, the other thing is if I don't really understand the problems that I'm solutioning for, I don't understand if I've solved those problems.
So welcome everybody to another episode of the Hiring Excellence Podcast. I'm Johnny Campbell, CEO and co-founder of Social Talent, and your host for today's podcast. So today we're going to be talking about equitable and human-first design around particularly AI technologies. And joining me today, we've got the wonderful Tara Turk-Haynes, the founder of Equity Activations, and not so wonderful, but he's okay, Jason Pistulka, founder of StratTech Consulting. I jest, but Jason actually is the inspiration for the theme of today's topic as well. And I'm really interested in getting into conversation with himself and Tara. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome our guests, and they can better explain their own backgrounds, what they're doing, why they're passionate about this topic. And Jason, maybe I'll start with you. Tell us where you're joining from. What do you do? What have you done? Why this topic?
Yep. Joining from Nashville, Tennessee. I do consulting work for end users and advisory work for about 10 different tech companies. And the consulting work I do is everything from business strategy consulting, marketing consulting, but obviously TA consulting as well. And all my tech companies are in the TA space that I consult with. I have 25 plus years of experience in the HR realm, everything from financial services, tech, and then into healthcare, and spent the last 15 years of that doing recruiting work. So today I really focus a lot on process optimization and really operational excellence within organizations. And many people try to affect that through technology. Some do it really well, some not so well. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Very important, Jason. Pets, hobbies, favorite movie?
Pets, 3. I have my dog Ozzy, and then I married a couple of years ago, and she brought in Lizzie and Shar, dogs, and then we also have a cat, I guess, belongs to my daughter-in-law, stepdaughter, and so it's Tommy. And my hobbies, work. That's kind of my hobby. I love tech and love to read business and all that kind of stuff. And chase my kids around. So I have 7 kids from ages of 17 to 25.
Whoa.
And part of the reason why I retired from HCA in March is my kids needed me more than HCA needed me. So that's where I'm at.
I love that. Tara, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Tara Turk-Haynes. I am the founder of Equity Activations. We're a consulting company that helps businesses embed equity into their people strategy, whether it's from talent acquisition all the way to employee engagement, all the way to internal comms. I'm a first-generation college graduate and corporate worker, and when I got into work, people who looked like me, I found, did not have the best experience introducing themselves into the corporate work. And so I come at it from a very different perspective. My dad worked on the line at Ford for 40 years. My mom was an accounts payable clerk. So when I got into being like an executive or in corporate worlds, I just had a very different point of view. I don't love that this is how we've always done it. I also try to explain it in the room for the person who has the least amount of experience, never assuming that everybody knows what corporate speak is and, what EBITDA is and all of these different things. I really want to make sure when people get into the workplace that they have a fair advantage across the board. I was in talent acquisition for over 15 years. Before that, I was an executive assistant for C-suite. So I also have a very different perspective on how businesses run and experiencing other people and how they operate within the business. I've built TA teams. I have worked for startups. I've worked for mid-sized public companies. I really enjoy making sure that we are talking about how to make our processes better for everybody in the workplace, because I believe that that connects to a stronger business. Like, I just feel like it's people strategies are sometimes thought of as administrative departments that don't generate any revenue. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of leaders have. And so I try to help them get to the end of the road where we definitely have some synergies when we think about people strategy.
The question that Jason never asked: favorite movie, Tara?
That's like Sophie's choice because I'm a playwright as well. So, as a writer, there's absolutely no such thing as a favorite movie, because there's a favorite movie for that particular moment or feeling that you have in that space of time, which is something that I also bring to my businesses. I believe storytelling is the best way we're ever going to get to some understanding. I just feel like it really helps. And so my two worlds collide in my business, which I think is great. So I can never say favorite movie. But yeah, it's there's like 100 favorite movies.
Hands
Like
down, hands down for me is Shawshank Redemption. So I can't tell you how many times I've watched it, but a bazillion. So
yeah. It's too hard. It's too hard.
I agree. Like whenever I think of, oh, that's my favorite movie, I'm like, oh, but what about this other thing? Oh, that's also my favorite movie, and on and on and on. So I want to dig into this, right? Because Jason, I'll come back to your point around, you said, after leaving HCA and a really good career in TA, you're now sitting on the kind of advising the vendor side, the tech companies, and you're working with, I think you said about 10 tech companies. And I imagine that's given you a huge amount of insight in terms of, oh, hang on a second, these are the people building the tech that we've been using. I'm sure there's some really great stories, and you've probably met loads of folks who haven't done it quite so well. What has been that insight around, where there's this disconnect perhaps between the vendor's perspective of what they're trying to do versus the buyer's perspective, the customer, the user's perspective, what they're trying to do? Talk me through some of those challenges, some of those clashes.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to before I did my HR career. I worked a couple of years in management consulting, and the leader of the firm said, the biggest thing that you can do with a prospect is just have them tell about your problems, and go through and tell you all the things that they're dealing with. What I see so many vendors do is they come with a solution. So their whole thing is, I want to tell you about my solution, not even knowing what their problems are, not even knowing where they are in their life cycle from a maturity and readiness, right, to make those moves. Because there's some organizations out there that are running a pretty tight TA shop. And if you're going to bring technology to them, the technology you bring better be fairly nuanced and be able to fit niche areas that they have challenges in. There's other places that, they're just a mess, beginning to end, right? And kind of Groundhog Day. Anything different is better than where we're at. And so if you don't take the time to understand, where the client is and where their problems really are, you don't know what you're solutioning for. And then, the other thing is if I don't really understand the problems that I'm solutioning for, I don't understand if I've solved those problems. So when you start thinking about QBRs, and I'm going to do QBRs with my clients as I go forward, what am I going to present out on? If what I want to present out on is, these are the problems, these are the measurements we did before we came in, these are the measurements afterwards, and I can empirically show I solved your problem. And I just see a lack of that kind of approach. And then the other thing with that is so often it's a one-time sell, and without calling out certain vendors, but there's ones that are really, really bad about this, that they'll sell in a small portion of their product, and then they'll walk away. And as long as they keep paying the bill, they will not really advise them, or, what's your next challenge, your next problem. So I've seen so many people over the years that said, oh, I got into replacing my recruitment marketing platform. I say, well, why are you doing that? Well, because this new one has X, Y, and Z. And I go, wait a minute, the one you're using has that already, and you're gutting the platform. And so somebody just gave up revenue, gave up a customer, because they're not continuing to engage and understand what your problems are now.
Tara, there's a nuance
Mhm.
to the world of tech buying in 25, 26. And I think we'll go forward for the next few years, which is we're now, for probably for the first time, looking at tech, not just from the functionality perspective, or does it solve the problem, as Jason said, but also is this going to reduce, enhance bias, be less equitable for different folks? Are you
Yep.
seeing that being a much bigger thing, like being an issue that people are actually trying to evaluate, to say, if I turn
Yeah.
this on, what will my outcomes be? Will there be disparate outcomes from this kind of usage? How should we test it? How should we evaluate it? What has been your sense of that angle to making tech purchases these days?
I'm so glad you asked that because it's such a it's really important for me as a TA consultant. One of the things that's really important to me is to stay grounded in the candidate experience. I am very much into my friend groups, on social media. What are candidates saying about the experience that they're having when they're applying for these jobs? Because it's vastly different between what the companies are talking about when they talk about how wonderful their AI tech is, right? I have a really good friend who's out of work right now, and she asked me to look at her resume. And she's like, I think it's really good because it's gotten past the AI gatekeepers because I haven't gotten an automatic rejection. And I was like, okay, we need to rewind a couple of things here. Like, let's just go back. And this is exactly what candidates are experiencing. They think that AI is this big boogeyman that's keeping them from all of these jobs. That's absolutely not happening. And so while we're in the TA space having these amazing conversations about how much our lives are easier and oh my goodness, this flow is so much greater, we have people who literally think this is just another way to shut us out from getting jobs. And in this economy right now that we're having, it's absolutely the wrong message. I took an AI ethics certification class through an organization I'm super proud of, Sarah Jane Academy, that really kind of focuses on people experiences. And one of the things that I think we are forgetting is who are we bringing along when we're talking about AI tech, right? This goes within the companies, but also within candidate experiences. What does AI tech actually mean? And one of the things, like I said before, as a writer, we need shared definitions of what we're talking about, right? What does this mean when we're talking about your interview is going to be a lot more ethical, or we're going to be able to schedule things clearly. We're having different conversations. And so what usually happens in those scenarios is that we lose marginalized people really quickly. I think Charter, which is one of those they do research within tech, they were talking about the onset of AI is going to leave behind Black and brown people as well as people over the age of 50 if companies are not very specific about teaching people exactly what that AI tech is going to do. We just make assumptions that people are going to go ahead and teach themselves these things. And your AI tech is only as good as you are as a recruiter. I think one thing that's happening is that we're highlighting all of the biases and microaggressions that possibly happen when we have these AI tools. They can't run by themselves. They're not going to magically reset you to be an ethical recruiter or get rid of your biases or your microaggressions automatically. So we really have to be a bit more mindful as we move into that.
So you brought up something there around, this perspective of being auto rejected, and I didn't get auto rejected,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
oftentimes the auto rejection can be because of non-AI processes
Exactly.
and tools, right?
Exactly.
It could be knockout questions that we've had for
Knockout
years, right?
questions.
Like this,
Years.
Jason, you brought this up when we were prepping for this. You were talking about, whether it's AI or not AI, how sometimes you can have a knockout, term,
Mhm.
not a question, but around something like salary, right? And that, it isn't necessarily the technology that's the problem. It can be how someone has thought about implementing it. Do you want to share that story in terms
Yeah.
of what you came across? I thought it was really, I hadn't thought of this before you brought it up. I loved it as an example of how the design rather than technology could cause that
Mhm.
inequity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big fan of knockout questions or job specific questions. And when I was at HCA, we used them extensively. Now we didn't automate on them at all, but what we did use them is for stack ranking and things of that nature until we got to salary. And we built this wonderful functionality where it would read the job description and it would say, okay, this is an exempt job or non-exempt. And it would automatically ask the question, what's the hourly or annual salary that you're seeking as a candidate? And the recruiter would have the ability to put a maximum in. And if the candidate answered above the maximum, it would reject them and it would tell them you're being rejected for salary. Now, in addition, we delayed those rejections. So we didn't want them to anything to feel auto reject. So we were able to delay rejections. But with the point of salary, though, the recruiters decided that they didn't like some of the verbiage in the rejections that were going out, and they decided to rewrite them. And somebody on my team worked with them. I didn't look at them directly, but they turned these on. And in the salary reject verbiage, they said, if you would accept a lower salary, please contact your recruiter. And they popped the recruiter email in there. It wasn't on for a day. The recruiter started screaming, shut it off, shut it off. We can't handle this many emails. You can imagine in some of the high volume areas, work from home, collections, this kind of stuff. And I went ding, 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 ding. Oh, this is exciting. And what a discovery. And so what we did was we looked at, can we automate this? And so the design was, if the candidate is over the amount, it kicks a text off to the candidate saying, Johnny, based on what you said you needed for salary for this job, you're likely to be rejected. If you would consider a lower salary, please respond to this text. And then a bot scrapes the response. If it comes back, populates in the ATS, the new amount, and you just delay the auto reject by a few hours. And usually your email responses come well within 30 minutes. And now you're recapturing a whole set of candidates. Something that you wish every recruiter would do if they actually had time to do it. But there's really no value add of having a recruiter send that email. Man, the ATS send that text and capture the data and pull it back in. So it when you talk about how do you make a hiring process more human, with AI, it's a great example. It's not even really AI, it's automation. And I think we overuse the AI pieces so much. But so there's opportunities like that that we can do. And my other thing with, you see so many people with putting AI interviewers in, and they're doing it in lieu of knockout or job specific questions. And I had somebody at Unleash was demonstrating, their wonderful AI interviewer that they had just put in for this large healthcare company. And he has me listen to it. And the AI interviewer asks, are you 18 years of age? Are you willing to do a background check? Do you have a nursing license? And I went, so number one, you are charging the company for an AI interviewer cost for things that are simple knockouts on the job that the candidate got invited to do an AI interview with some hope that they would actually be able to get this job when there was never any hope. That's a horrible design. So it wasn't the fact that the vendor's AI interviewer didn't work. It's that the vendor came in and just said, well, what do you want us to do? And then they did it rather than sitting down and saying, well, listen, we can probably cut your AI costs by 20% by asking knockout questions on the front end, increase your satisfaction of your candidates and make things more relevant. So just another example of just any lack of design.
Tara, what do you think about, on the positive side? Because we could say here we can diss AI all day long, right, and processes, right, and we'll get so far, but not going to probably help anyone. But when I think about possibilities, and Jason brought up that AI interviewer, right? So I have 4 boys. A lot of our listeners will know that. 2 of them, my twins in the middle, are both have autism, or both autistic, and they're autistic in completely different ways, right? They're very capable. They've low needs, and they're fantastic. But I think about them in the workplace. I think about actually their differences, right? Because, they're literally on different spectrums of personality and how they would treat different situations. And I'd see one who's massive anxiety, the other one doesn't give a damn, right? And I can think about them approaching an interview, right, which creates a lot of anxiety for different people, right, from neurotypical and neurodivergent backgrounds. But I think about an AI interviewer that doesn't care how long you take to answer the question, doesn't put you under pressure to go faster. You can stop and start whenever you want. I see this as a really positive thing for equity in terms of, because the current is you have 30 minutes to talk to somebody who is judging you as you answer. right? Depending on your background. Like, so what do you see positive signs for tools like that for opening that aperture to different folks with different backgrounds, different personality styles to basically present themselves to employers?
Uh, yeah, and you know what? I am not down on tech, and I'm not down on AI or automation or any of these things because I think they can be really exciting. It really goes back to what Jason was talking about: is how mindful are you being as you roll these things out, right? It's not the technology that is concerning. It's the people behind it and how they're thinking about approaching it, right? One of the things that really set me up for success in TA is that I was a former journalist. And so the way that I ask questions really was to get the answers from candidates. There are a lot of recruiters out there who don't have that skill set at all, right? I've heard recruiters who read the questions off of a paper and they almost sound automated, right? So
Hmm.
you you might as well, automate that as well. But the thing about it is that we need to be very mindful about who are we designing for, who's not in the room as we design these things so that we can have those aha moments that Jason was talking about early on. And that really comes from leaders who are thinking about this in a way that allows us to enhance rather than replace.
Mm,
And I think
or-
that's the biggest thing is what we think about is a lot of, I don't know if this happens in other parts of the business, but HR is really nervous about AI taking over their jobs. I don't know if accounting is thinking the same thing. I don't know if legal is thinking the same thing, but we really need to dial it back a little bit and think about like how is this going to help us be better business people rather than thinking about how efficient this is going to be because we can do all these like massive layoffs and this can replace this one thing or the next thing. And another part of this is when Jason was talking about texting, like if you think about like younger generations, no, they and how they respond from communication standpoint. Nobody wants to read a bunch of emails, right? My phone is super easy. Text me. How easy can this be for me as I enter the workplace because I don't have the same relationship to tech tools as say a Gen X or a boomer, right? Or elder millennial. Like there's different ways we approach technology. There are all these conversations we should be having where we're thinking about how do we roll something out so that it's better for everybody.
So the way we used to talk about this, right? Um, Before D&I became a bad initialism, apparently to use in the world, we talked about, the fact, and maybe certainly the conversations I've been in was you start with the diversity of the team. So the team who's doing the recruiting. So because you're both super smart. You've
Yeah.
whatever for whatever reason been able to think outside your own personal background and upbringing and socioeconomic situation and consider others, right? So that's
Yeah.
fairly evident. Not everyone can do that, and so therefore
Right.
I kind of signed up to the whole, well, just make sure in the team you have a whole different bunch of people from the city, from the country. Because when I say diverse, I just don't mean like the color of your skin or its age. Are you a city dweller? Are you a country dweller? Did
Yeah.
you go to college,
Hmm.
not go to college? Because you've got a team of people from all those different, as many backgrounds as possible. As you're designing a process, if you're an inclusive leader who tries to get everyone involved, some will go, hey, I wouldn't be able to use that, or hey, I see a problem you're not seeing there. Is that how we
Yeah.
do it, or how else could we approach it with a broader mindset of trying to see this process through the lens of all the possible candidates or hiring managers or wherever the kind of user is of that tool?
I mean, I'll say, there are 40 plus different social identities when we talk about diversity, right? And so diversity means presence. Inclusion also means how comfortable are those people on your team by raising their hands and saying, because if you think about people from different, maybe socioeconomic or different cultures that are not very verbose within the workplace, right? How comfortable are they telling you, like, hi, actually, I just actually don't know what you just said, Jason. Like, can you explain to me, like, how this tool works? So you also have to develop that possibility of them being able to contribute to the team as well. But it really is important to have representation. It's just a matter of like, and I think, we all talked about how our good friend Torrin Ellis is excellent in this room, but he says, when I hire, I'm hiring for the best person possible. And that also includes, right, the person who has different perspectives, who can bring something to the table, who can make the thing better, right? And I think that that's really important. So when we talk about DE&I just being like this, this buzzword that people are starting to redefine, what we're getting at is how do we make the business better because we have these different perspectives who are actually going to, kick the tires and make sure the tires run well. Jason, I don't know what you think about
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I think it's not only having the right diversity on the team, but what's your methodologies in which you get that team input. So I'm a big fan of using murals where you're doing anonymous mural sessions. I'm a big fan of Edward Bono's Six Hats thinking, because it really helps bring those people out that maybe don't have such strong opinions, and usually sit in the background. And they usually also often have some of the best ideas. So it's about how you facilitate discussions with those teams too in the design process and doing design thinking, that, really helps ensure that those diverse voices are actually heard and not just on the team, but silent.
I love that.
And
We
hopefully
used to.
they use the technology as well, right? Like getting your team to actually go through the process, right? Like
One of
sometimes that's missed.
one of my favorite things that I would say to leaders, in healthcare, we hire a lot of hourly workers, and so like in the medical offices, right? And they would have ghosting problems. And I'd say, do you think it has anything to do with the fact that you've asked them to lie to their employer and take precious PTO time to come interview with you? And they're going like, what do you mean? These people have never had an hourly job in their life, right? So they don't
That's
understand you're not
insane.
exempt. I
Yep.
can't just, blitz out for an
Yep.
hour and say, hey, I got an errand to run. Literally,
Yeah.
you're asking your people to lie. And then
Right.
you're
Yeah.
asking them to take PTO, and they're a single parent and they needed that PTO to go to little Johnny's baseball game or whatever else it is, so that empathy of
Yep.
that you can get having all of those various people in there as you're designing processes. It's not just processes, but what are the human behaviors that you're seeing from your hiring managers, like opening up your interview calendar for odd times of the day that they may be
Mhm.
more accessible,
Yeah.
so that kind of stuff.
I remember being in Hyderabad in India about 10 years ago. And I was in, I think, IBM's offices. And we're doing a session with the recruiting team. And I arrived at 9 a.m. And you had to get checked into the security hut outside the building. You couldn't get your security badge in the building for security, was out to the side. And there was a huge line. And I was like, okay, we joined the line. He's like, no, 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 Johnny, we have you prepped. Here's your badge. And I got to skip, right, and go into the building. And we're doing this workshop with the recruiters. And I was saying, like, do you interview everyone on site? They were like, yeah, they come in here. I was like, okay. Do you do a lot of interviewing at 9 a.m.? Like, yeah, sure. Lots of people do interviews at 9 a.m. I was like, right, well, like, there's this big line for people who don't work here, like me, and it takes 20 minutes to get through it. They're like, oh yeah, I kind of noticed that. I'm like, yeah. I was like, do you tell candidates that there's going to be a 20-minute line to get a security badge? And there was just like, no one had thought of this. I was like, because if I arrive at 15 minutes before the hour thinking I've loads of time, I'm going to be late. How will that person
Hmm.
perform already 10 minutes late to the interview
Mhm.
with a manager that for this new job? Will you get the best out of that candidate? They're like, oh, shoot, no. I was like, all right, how could we fix this? And we did a little workshop, and someone said, we have these automated emails that go out for our system, and we can just put a note saying for this building, because we can code it, be here 20 minutes early with extra text. It's like, okay, good, done. And
Yeah.
again, it was that kind of that thoughtful design, bringing people together, kind of walk in their shoes. And this was, they hadn't walked in a candidate's shoes. They hadn't been a candidate
Mhm.
arriving to their office. They were an employee arriving to their
Hmm.
office. And you
Yep.
can lose that. Like, so like I go back to your first point, Jason, on the vendor side, right? Like, and I hate to bash, certain vendors, but sometimes I find you have a software engineer, and maybe she decides that she can code the best solution for something that she's never done before. She's never been a recruiter, or she's never done hiring, or
Mhm.
whatever it might be. And you know that happens a lot, right? Because you a lot of software founders are software people. They're not doing the job they're building a solution for. So how can someone like that get in the heads of the people like us who do the work, who've done the work? Have you come across good examples of it? Do you know some folks who have an approach to it?
Yeah, it So the best vendors usually will have good domain expertise on their team, and they're leveraging that domain expertise. So even though the developer themselves may not have the domain expertise, the people who are involved in the process, right? Kind of coming back to this facilitation and making sure that all those voices are heard, very much using an IDEO kind of methodology of design thinking, is really important. I mean, I go back to, I had a guy, a data guy that I hired at HCA, that came in, never worked in recruiting in his life. And I can't tell you how many days he spent at a recruiter's desk watching them, asking. He figured out exactly what action and click created what piece of data in the database, right? And so you can, if you have the desire and the curiosity, you can learn it, you can understand it. It's really a mindset. But also many coders, in most cases, probably the worst in ATSs. You can tell this is coded by somebody who really was thinking about a widget and not a person, when they're putting that stuff through. That's why the likes of Ashby is so insightful, because they're building something that actually was with humans in mind when they designed it. But that's still mostly in the big ERP, Oracle, and Workday. Pick whoever you want. They're none of them are good in that regard. They've designed these things to be transacted much like accounts payable or accounts
Right.
receivable, rather
Right.
than really dealing with humans. And that's the challenge of ERP based systems. It's unfortunately most of large corporate America has to run on.
Yeah.
And Tara, when I think
It,
about take the vendor example, but bring it down to like the team itself, right?
yeah.
There's proactive kind of just better candidate experience, right? But we are genuinely facing this challenge, right? Which I think is that we got rid of DEI departments, but then now but if right or wrongly, we did that, but now actually the bias is increasingly moving from a person to a machine, to a tool, right? So
Exactly.
it's arguably the real focus isn't actually on fixing the humans, because much more of it is machine or automation oriented. So like, what are some of the kind of things that folks should watch out for when they're purchasing tech that inadvertently might introduce a new bias? Rather, Jason was talking about fixing stuff that's better experience, but like way before
Right.
that, fixing bias, is there a methodology that people can approach? Can you give some examples of ways you've heard or ways you recommend that people could think about trying to test for these things when they're building a process with a new technology?
Yeah, I think it's really important. One, if we go back to the studs and really kind of ask TA people what they need, what problem are we trying to solve? And I think there needs to be more conversations between the vendors and the people who are actually doing the work, because we've seen at all these conferences, they're really great ideas, and they're usually somebody who came up with this idea in a silo. One of the questions I always ask is, how did you train your LLM? Like, what went into programming this thing that you think that I need, and walk me through that process. What problem is this trying to solve? I've been in CA for 15 years, and every vendor that I've had, they're always like, hey, suggest new product features for us. And then the ones that I suggest usually don't get rolled out at all. And I'm like, but I asked you for this one specific thing. I think, using your data as a TA person is so incredibly important. I don't, I'm in different industries than Jason. I've mostly worked in e-commerce and media and SaaS startups. And those are the kinds of things when I'm thinking about my candidate experience, I want to know who's getting through the funnel, why they're falling
Mm.
off, what can I make this better, how can I make their experience better, and how can I get more information to make the process continuously better. I'm losing people because of biases and microaggressions and all of these different things that are built systemically within the process, right? I'm assuming different time zones, I'm assuming different times of day that work better for people who are single mothers, who are caretakers, or who, all of these different things. And so if we don't have a strict process where we're asking questions like, how did you build your LLM? Where did you get this idea from? I think there was one person at one of the conferences we went to who said, that they mirror the background checks of our government, right now. I don't want that. Like, that's literally terrifying to me, right? Like, I feel like, one of the things is just like, if we have a great idea, we roll with it rather than talking to the people who work with the thing every single day and what are their goals and how can we, I think Jason mentioned this earlier, but adapting policies to make sure that we're reaching the goals that we actually have. It's not always to make things better. It's, more efficient. Better has to be defined, right? I want to get the best candidates through this process, no matter where they are, no matter what their background is, and how can you help me do that? And I think if you ingrain DE&I processes into that process, then you're going to get the outcome that you're looking for. But we have to ask better questions all around.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I look for my parents. My parents are elderly, and I look at their their interaction with technology. And I can't remember if it was you, Jason, or Tara said earlier on, like the over 50s are at risk
Yeah.
of being marginalized by AI tools. And you're kind of going like, you have this fantastic tool, and you go, this is brilliant, and we can implement
Yeah.
it, and it's powered by Paradox or somebody else, and it's all mobile enabled. And you go, okay, but our core population is 55 to 65. Are
Uh,
they going to use it in the way we
Right.
think they'll use it?
And the huge part about that also is that they're having to go back to work because of this economy and they're getting scammed higher rates, right? Because they don't know how to identify, the kind of technology that's reaching out to them right now. That, those recruiter emails that some of us go, oh, that's a real scam, right? They don't know that. And so, like, how can companies be better and people and vendors be better at being like, we need to protect the most vulnerable in these situations right now?
We're at the point in the podcast where I'm going to get the hook that drags me off, right? Because we're ahead of the time. So I'm going to go to the final thought, final piece of advice piece, right? And I'm going to just talk for 30 seconds to let your brains try and work on that, right? And then I'm going to pick on Jason first and let Tara have the final word. But if you're sitting here and you're nodding your head, you're listening to this, or you're on your walk listening to this podcast, or at your desk watching on LinkedIn, and you're saying, I 100% agree with this. I've been talking about better design, intentional design, human-led design for years. It isn't about the best tech necessarily. It's about the consideration. It's about being equitable in how you design this, thinking beyond you, the person, to all the possible candidate types, making it better, blah, blah, blah. If you're nodding your head and agreeing it and you want to do something about it, Jason, what a piece of advice, one core piece of advice would you share with somebody to get started on this journey?
Well, since it's all about AI right now, my biggest piece of advice is I say AI has three definitions. You have artificial intelligence, which there's very little of. That's highly trained. People took time. It's very specific. You have artificial ignorance, which there's tons of. I've seen more products come out that are just dangerous. And then you have assisted intelligence. And I think assistive intelligence is probably the most promising areas that you have. Examples of that is where you process your recruiter's phone screen through and you come back and you give the recruiters coaching and tips on how do you phone screen people better. It's where a candidate uploads their resume and the software will come back and say, hey, Johnny, you used to have this job. You likely have these skills. Can you confirm which skills you have? Instead of the AI guessing and inferring stuff that is probable but not necessarily right, assist the candidate in doing that. And there's a million places. Help the recruiter write better questions. There's a million places where you can use assisted intelligence that doesn't have the same legal risk, doesn't have the same complexity, but can have a huge impact on the quality of experience, that a candidate can have. And then when you decide to move to true AI, artificial intelligence, that you understand there's a huge amount of time and effort that goes into training, validation, and everything on that. And most of the vendors out there aren't providing that today.
I love that. Less of the ignorance, more of the assisted for the moment, and eventually we'll get to the
Yep.
official. Love that. Love that. Tara, how about you?
I would encourage people to audit their process. Like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for, rather than throwing something that you think is going to just fix all of the problems, right? And I think one of the things that's really important, especially as business leaders, and this goes for your talent program or anything that you're doing, if you don't know exactly how your process is running and what's working and what's not, then you might sign on for something that you actually don't need, and it will cause you a lot more time and money to fix that thing later on. I think it's really important to be super curious, audit your process, do an analysis, bring somebody in that says, okay, this is the problem you're having. This is how we can solve this. Sometimes it'll be automation and AI. Sometimes it'll actually be the thing where you can just like have a light bulb moment like Jason was talking
Mm,
about. But what we
mm.
really want to be able to do is you're focusing on problem solving rather than more technology just to have the technology.
I love that. Two pieces of fantastic advice. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the energy, folks, and thank you for bringing it. We could go on, but we'll not. There's an extended version for premium subscribers where you can listen to us for 6 more hours talking about this topic. Just subscribe here. But there's not
we
genuinely
we
nobody.
reenact Shawshank Redemption with Jason.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. And Tara lists her favorite 100 movies today.
Exactly.
So
With
huge
scenes
thanks to
acted
both
by
of you.
Tony.
Oh, do not get me acting. Listen, thank you both for joining. Fantastic to have your input. Jason, thank you. Tara, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us. This was great.
And
Absolutely.
a huge thank you to you for listening to today's show. Hopefully that's given you some inspiration and to think a little bit more about that human-centered design. Don't rely purely on the technology. As Tara said, what problem are you solving? And as Jason said, put your thinking hat on and try and just think about what are we actually trying to do? How can we use the technology or process or automation a little bit better in a more humane way? That is the assisted technology way of doing it. So folks, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week on Hiring Excellence with another great guest. Until then, take care.